GraceandTruthRadio.world proudly presents Life Coaching for Men, improving their relationships with their wives and learning to communicate for a more fulfilling and satisfying marriage. And now, Men Loving Well, with Christian counselor, author, and relationship coach, Dr. Jim Slaughter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show today. Well-known psychiatrist and author Dr. Frank Minner put it well when he asked this question. What is the most deadly emotion of all time? What is one of the most common factors in the number one cause of death in America? What destroys more people than any other emotion? What word is unsurpassed in synonyms? What is the most common sinister emotion in all of us? Anger is the answer. You know, we all get angry. I mean, it's normal and occurs to some extent in everyone. It's part of our humanness. In lesser degrees, we experience it as annoyance or frustration or indignation. Anger is really a continuum, and it has many looks, from mild frustration to cold rage. It includes such feelings as aggravation, irritation, and hostility. So, yes, if you say, I wasn't mad, I was just frustrated, that's not entirely true, because frustration is a kind of anger. It's the appearance of anger inside us. We may feel it when we have to wait for a train to pass, or stand in line at the grocery store, or when someone treats us rudely. Anger is a common marriage problem for both men and women. Sometimes marriage is dissolved because the husband or the wife, or maybe both, are so angry. They're always finding fault, and so they take their frustration and maybe their hostility out on each other. Men, we need to realize that few things are less attractive to our wives than anger. For some husbands, overcoming their anger is a long, hard mountain to climb. Marriages are saturated with it. Sometimes a man's wife just gets her fill of it and moves on because she wants something better. At times, anger may escalate to become wrath or fury or rage. Lesser forms become distractions. More severe forms can leave lots of destruction in their wake. What anger causes us to do can be pretty unbelievable at times. One person who came to our clinic for help had torn away all the wooden molding inside his house and had destroyed every piece of furniture, all in a fit of rage. The stakes become higher when someone directs anger towards another person. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Galatians, lists fits of rage among deeds of the flesh, which are in opposition to the Spirit of God, Galatians 5:20. But the fruit of God's Spirit includes the qualities of love, peace, gentleness, and self-control, verses 22 and 23. When anger does rise up in us, it's bound to, of course, at one time or another. It's best to reconcile it before the end of the day, Ephesians 4:26. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. So, we all get mad sometimes. You're not immune, neither am I. And we're lucky if all we leave in our wake is hurt feelings. A few years ago, I made a discovery that helps me defuse most anger before it gets started inside me. And I want to give you a heads up about it because it can help you too. I want to begin by suggesting that anger actually can be our sixth sense. Because anger is a useful diagnostic tool, actually. When anger erupts in us, it's a signal, isn't it, that something is wrong. Something isn't working just right. There's evil or incompetence or stupidity lurking about. Anger is our sixth sense for sniffing out wrong in the neighborhood. Diagnostically, it's virtually infallible, and we learn to trust it. Anger is infused by a moral, spiritual intensity that carries conviction. When we are angry, we know we're onto something that matters, that really counts. When God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry?" Jonah shot back, "I do well to be angry, angry enough to die." Jonah 4:9. What anger fails to do, though, is to tell us whether the wrong is outside us or inside us. We usually begin by assuming that the wrong is outside us. Somebody else is wrong. It's them out there, our spouse, our kid, our God has done something wrong, and we're mad about it. We're angry about it. That's what Jonah did, and he argued with God. But when we track the anger carefully, we often, should I say usually, find it leads to a wrong within us. Wrong information, wrong understanding. underdeveloped heart, whatever it may be, if we admit and face that we are pulled out of our quarrel with God or someone else into something large and vocational in God, and we deal with ourselves. It's easy to misinterpret what really happens to make us angry in a particular situation. And that's the whole gist of our program today, really. It's easy to misinterpret what really happens to make us angry in a particular situation. We judge quickly that it's something else when we're really looking at something below the surface. We misread the signs. Misunderstanding provokes trigger thoughts in us, our own particular anger buttons. When these triggers are pulled and the buttons are pushed, anger usually erupts in some form. Distorted thinking produces anger. Distorted thinking produces anger, hence the term that some people use, anger distortions. Anger distortions are behind the vast majority of anger incidents. Therefore, to achieve and maintain control of anger, to handle it better, we must understand how facts are skewed when we get angry. We can learn to redirect our thinking by considering other possible causes and solutions. We reinterpret, read the signs more accurately, and make distorted thinking more clear. First, look at the distinction between sensory input, that is what my eyes see, my ears hear, my touch feels, what those sensory apparatus tell me. Look at the distinction between that and the meanings we create out of sensory information. In truth, we are entirely cut off from direct experience of reality, and what we, quote, quote, see is an internal computer screen created by our conclusions, our evaluations, not the actual event. Now, here's an example. Everybody's probably been here before. You're late for a lunch appointment with a friend. When you arrive, your sensory input tells you your friend is frowning, his eyes are narrowing, his voice is different, and he's saying something about having to rush. Because you're late for the appointment, your evaluation is that he must be mad at you. That's the conclusion on your internal screen. So you begin to react defensively, maybe even pick a fight. Only later do you learn that he was late too, had rushed to meet you, and was relieved that he hadn't kept you waiting. Now here's what's important. The assumptions on your screen had almost nothing to do with reality. You had taken a frown and narrow eyes and ambiguous comment and created a completely distorted picture out of them. We do this all the time. We make assumptions about the motives and feelings of others, and often we're very wrong, and we become angered by them nonetheless. Now, here's an exercise that's really interesting and helps us see this a little bit more vividly. The following is a transcript of a woman describing in a psychotherapy session a recent anger episode with her invalid mother. Now, this is an actual session that took place, and this is the transcript from the session. And so here's the transcript. This is what's on Carol's screen. This is how Carol interprets what's going on between her and her mom. So speaking of her mom, Carol says to the therapist, "She was looking at me with wide open, help me eyes, like she didn't care that I'd already been over there 3 times that week. So I said, 'What is it, Mom?' And she just sits there and doesn't say anything. She's really still, like it's beneath her to speak the obvious, that I was put on this earth to take care of her, and I'm screwing it up. I can tell she's just disgusted with me. Finally she says, 'How about some music?' and puts on this hideous Lawrence Welk record, which she knows I hate, and only plays when she's annoyed with me. My mother lives in passive-aggressiveville. And she lies. If she says A, assume she means B. While the record is on, she says, 'All I really want is to get along with you, Carol.' But I know that's code for 'What's wrong with you, Carol, that you don't get along with me?' It's disguised criticism. That's the way she works. Then she kisses me and says all the hassling is wearing her out, and she's going to take a nap before dinner. And she sort of shuffles off like I've destroyed her or something. Let's look ahead and see what in the transcript is sensory input and what comes from Carol's screen. I'm going to reread the transcript, and I'm only going to highlight and read those portions that are sensory input, that is, the reality of the situation. We're going to leave aside what Carol interprets in what her senses tell her. So here we go. This is what really happened. She was looking at me with wide open eyes. So I said, 'What is it, Mom?' And she just sits there and doesn't say anything. She's really still. Finally, she says, 'How about some music?' and puts on this Lawrence Welk record. While the record's on, she says, "All I really want is to get along with you, Carol." Then she kisses me and says all the hassling is wearing her out and she's going to take a nap before dinner, and she sort of shuffles off. Now, when you separate the sensory data from the conclusions on Carol's screen, it seems like two almost totally different experiences. There are two different stories here. In particular, the assumption she's just disgusted with me appears very disconnected from what actually was said and done. In our normal thinking, sensory input and screen conclusions get folded together. The belief she's disgusted with me seems every bit as real as what Carol actually saw and heard. The trouble is that distorted conclusions on our screen often trigger big anger reactions, and we have no idea how far the assumptions on our screen are from reality. Carol has misread the signs and is guilty of some common distorted thinking, anger distortions. Consequently, her anger flares up towards her mom. Feelings are hurt, and the emotional distance between them probably widens. We can make the same mistakes when we misread the signs. How often do you do that? How often do I do that? Anger can be heightened and accelerated when our thinking becomes distorted by some common misinterpretations. And these cognitive or thinking distortions cause us to misinterpret or misrepresent motives, importance, responsibility, impact, and outcome of anger incidents. We don't have all the facts. We assume too much. We become angry. And we're all guilty of distorted thinking at times. Identifying the distortions we resort to most often helps us avoid anger traps we might otherwise fall into. So here are the 6 common thinking distortions, along with some scenarios illustrating them. Think of these as anger accelerants because they're just like throwing gasoline on a fire. They're incendiary and inflammatory. Think about which ones you use from time to time, things you're guilty of from time to time, misinterpretations that you make from time to time. Let's rethink them, and that will cut down our anger quite a bit. The first distortion I'm going to mention that we use is blaming. Blaming, assigning fault to the other person. We've got to make it somebody else's fault. Now, here's a scenario that might illustrate that. Someone says, "Why does everything have to look perfect for you? You're making us late for the movie, and you know the first 5 minutes is the most important part. The whole thing is your fault." Well, boy, that might start a fight. I doubt if they'll enjoy the movie after that interaction. Some people have just got to make it somebody else's fault. But when we do that, that becomes inflammatory. It starts anger incidents, and someone gets angry, someone gets hurt. So number 1 is blaming. What I'm asking you to do here is to think about which of these anger distortions and misinterpretations you use so that you can focus on that in your own life. Now, the second distortion is assuming. Boy, this is one I use a lot, and I've had to really clamp down on it. Assuming. This is mind reading. It's jumping to conclusions. It's using single explanations for everything. It's deciding what's true before having all the facts. I don't know if you do that, but I've been guilty of that, and it's made me look like a fool. Scenario. He's late for lunch. I've really been looking forward to this, but it doesn't seem to matter to him. Maybe I don't really matter to him. Obviously, something more important to him than me came up. Okay, there are lots of assumptions there. They're assuming that he doesn't care. I think most of us tend to do this. We let our brain fill in the blanks. We finish the sentence without the facts, read between the lines, those kinds of things. But when we begin assuming, we're usually wrong, and we look very foolish. The third distortion is magnifying. Magnifying is exaggerating, making things out to be worse than they really are. Someone coined the term catastrophizing. Making mountains out of molehills is what we're talking about here. And some people do this. Everything is like the sky is falling. It's the end of the world. Here's the scenario. The house payment was due yesterday. How can you possibly forget that? This is going to get us in big trouble with the mortgage company. Our credit score will fall off the chart. We're going to lose our house. We'll end up having to file bankruptcy. I know it. Well, usually when we magnify to that extent and we act like the sky is falling and that the end of the world is imminent, we're going to be wrong. There's always a way through things, and nothing is ever that bad. Number 4 is global labeling. Some people have used the term name calling for this. It really is sort of pinning a negative identity label on someone. You're grouping people into sort of a negative category. Here's a scenario that might illustrate it. The guy walks out in his yard. He says, "I can't believe the neighbor's kid's ball is in my yard again. And I'm sure they expect me just to throw it back over the fence. They're such jerks. They're mindless and irresponsible. If there were a bad neighbor club, they would be charter members." Do you ever do that? You lump people together in a kind of a negative group. That is an incendiary. It's inflammatory thinking. And we misread the signs when we do that. We don't know what's going on with them. But often we're guilty of doing that, and it makes us angry, and it creates anger incidents often. Think that guy can be friends with his neighbor? Not right now. He's going to have to overcome that in order to bridge some gaps. The 5th anger distortion that we are guilty of sometimes is overgeneralizing. This is using broad, absolute terms like always and never to describe someone or to describe a situation, but mostly it's with people. He always does this. She never does that. I have tried to just strike those words from my vocabulary pretty much, except in certain specific situations. But most of the time when I use always and never, I'm exaggerating. I'm overgeneralizing. I'm going too far. And here's a scenario. You are without doubt the worst driver I've ever seen. You always drive over the speed limit. You never come to a full stop at stop signs. And you always weave in and out of traffic. It's like you can never get where you're going fast enough. Like you're always on your way to a fire or something. Well, when we overgeneralize like that, and the problem is that, it's people will change their approach sometimes. They won't always do it the same way. They won't never do certain things. But that's kind of the way it turns out when we do this. But most of us have tended in the past to do that, using always and never absolutes to describe someone. When we do that, we get this picture of them in our minds, don't we? We often misrepresent the facts. Is it true? Well, sometimes, but sometimes not. But we have it down that that's just who they are and what they do, and it creates an inflammatory situation, makes us angry, and creates anger incidents. Here's number 6, and the final one. Demanding, commanding. Demanding, commanding. This is believing my way is the only right way, when there may be neither a right nor wrong, but simply a preference. Have you ever known people who, if you didn't do it their way, you were just wrong from their perspective? They didn't think there was another way to do it right. And that's just what this is about. Those people are demanding people. They're commanding people. And when we do that, it's going to inflame our anger. Here's a scenario. Why on earth did you use that exit from the parking lot? We would have gotten home quicker if you'd used the other exit. That one makes much more sense. Okay, is there really a right and a wrong exit to take? No, it's just a preference, or it's just how I went down the line of cars to get out. It's a preference. It's not right or wrong, except in that person's mind. What this person might really be saying here between the lines is, you are so stupid. You are really stupid. You know that? Because you select the exit down here, not the exit down here. That's not true. That has nothing to do with stupidity. It has only to do with preference. And so it's important to remember that. Now that we've talked about those anger distortions and listed them and numbered them, let me bring up some counter-response measures for you. These are things that we can do when we begin to realize that we're doing these things. If I know that I'm assuming, or if I know that I'm blaming, if I know that I'm exaggerating. So use the following response measures. These will help you avoid falling into an anger distortion trap. They can turn a potentially explosive incident into something uneventful with a positive outcome. With practice, they can become your instinctive response. You'll learn how to do it. It'll just come naturally to you. For blaming, if you realize you blame somebody, number 1, consider that maybe no one is at fault. Sometimes things just happen. And even if somebody is at fault, does it matter that much? Maybe it's time to put a plan together to solve the problem instead of blaming. Maybe it's time to forgive somebody and just move on. That's what we do when we catch ourselves blaming. What for people who assume? Before we get the facts, we make judgments. First of all, examine your assumptions about other people's motives. You could be wrong. Maybe you assumed the wrong thing. Find alternative explanations for the problem. What could be another explanation for what's happened? He's late. Does that mean he doesn't like me or want to be with me, or does it mean he had a flat tire or something? How about magnifying? Maybe you're a person who tends to magnify things, make them bigger than they really are. Number one, be honest but realistic. For example, say that it's disappointing or frustrating, but not horrible or catastrophic. So use very accurate language. Don't be general about this. Think of yourself as not falling into the trap of thinking the sky is falling or that the world is ending. Number three, think of a time when the opposite was also true. Global labeling. If this is something we do, then here's some things to help. If you're globally labeling and grouping people and that kind of thing, be specific about it. Focus on behavior, not the whole person. Did they do something wrong? If so, okay, we can deal with that. But it's not about this whole person, and I'm not going to call them names or group them into a negative label because of something or who they are. Avoid categorizing or profiling. This is our own personal way of profiling, and that can get people into trouble. And it's inflammatory. It's an incendiary. It causes anger. The fifth is overgeneralizing, and so we're avoiding terms like all, always, every, and never. Do you ever use those words? Might be good to cut them out of your vocabulary because they will eventually make us look foolish and wrong. Second part of this is to use specific and accurate descriptions. Look for exceptions to the rule. People sometimes act contrary to their tendencies. And the last one, again, is demanding and commanding. First, remember that most things are not necessarily right or wrong, but merely preferences. And if you can get that into your thinking, into your head, that's going to take you a long ways when it comes to this kind of behavior and this kind of thinking. In the long run, it usually doesn't matter much at all. Number two, strike should and ought from your vocabulary and think wants and desires and preferences instead. It's a preference, not an absolute. So guys, you can begin shutting down your anger before it takes over. When you begin feeling anger coming up and pushing your other emotions away, deal with it quickly. This is your sixth sense telling you something is wrong. But guess what? The wrong is probably not outside you, but inside of you. So we check for anger distortions when we feel that coming on. Ask yourself, am I blaming someone just to find fault? Instead of blaming, what's the best way to work this out? Focus on solving the problem. I need to slow down and think again. Number two, ask, am I assuming things before I have all the facts? Am I jumping to conclusions? You know, when you do that, you almost always end up looking like a fool. I need to slow down and think again. Ask, am I exaggerating? Am I making too much out of this? Tell yourself this isn't the end of the world. There's a solution here. I can get through this. I need to slow down and think again. Ask yourself, am I doing that global labeling thing? Pinning a negative label on someone, calling names and categorizing, my own form of profiling. Am I profiling somebody and pinning a negative label on them? I need to slow down and think again. Ask yourself, am I overgeneralizing here? Have I been guilty of using the word always or the word never? Have I attacked using absolutes, all and every, as weapons? If I have, my thinking is faulty and inflammatory. I need to slow down and think again. Ask yourself, have I been demanding and commanding? Have I stopped someone from doing something their way and demanded or commanded them to do it my way just because I think my way is better? Usually it's just a matter of preference, and there's no right or wrong. These are 6 anger distortions. Faulty thinking. Applying countermeasures to these forms of poor thinking has helped me over and over again to make better decisions, to keep my anger from flaring, and to preserve precious relationships. You can do it too, and shut down your anger before the sun sets.
Thank you again for joining us. Men Loving Well airs live every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Central Time on graceandtruthradio.world. If you would like to contact or coach with Dr. Jim Slaughter, reach out to him on Facebook.com, Living Well Show. Email him at jslaughterphd@yahoo.com or contact him at his clinic, Life Solutions, 817-232-1363. We look forward to seeing you again next week here on Men Loving Well.
Life Solutions Coaching and Counseling in Fort Worth, Texas is a full-service wellness clinic providing individual, group, and family counseling, one-on-one coaching for life and wellness, and naturopathic treatments of medical massage therapy combined with essential oils to ensure you reach your health and wellness goals. Sessions are available in person or by phone. Get started on your new life today. Just call 817-232-1363 or go to lifesolutionscoachingandcounseling.com or email them at lifesolutionscc@yahoo.com.